Faux-Shearling Vest with a little leather trim. Let's learn all the details. Welcome, welcome. Today we're going to talk about shearling vests because they're so popular. They don't necessarily need to be shearling, but the look of the shearling, and it has leather trim. So I want to do those two things in combination and really show you some great variables. This is really going to be a lot of fun. Simple, quick, and just really a lot of fun. And I can't wait to wear my vest. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually use pattern number 1953. It's called Lafayette's Jacket. And the reason I'm going to use it as a base is it's so similar to one I tried on at Neiman's, and I loved it. I just loved how it looked. I liked everything about it. So this was the closest pattern we had to it. And while it's not a jacket, it's a vest. I'm going to go through and show you like all the changes. And we've got a little bit of leather trim. So we're going to pull all these together. All right. So let's start by looking at our fabric. And what I'm going to use is we've got on our site quite a bit of these wonderful, they're like shearling fabrics, but they're knits. They're just really beautiful. So that's one of them that I'm going to use. And I've only got 4 pieces that I'm going to use out of the pattern, and that's the front, the side back, and the back. So those are the only 4 pieces I'm going to use. Now I am going to do a little bit of a styling change, and I'll show you what I'm going to do. Is that this is the front piece, and this is a shawl collar, and it's important for this look to have a shawl collar. And what I'm going to do is just cut it wider. So I'm going to go, you don't want to go to the shoulder seam, but I'm going to go to the inside and cut it wider because that's the part that's going to actually fold over, and it's going to look beautiful. So this, I've measured this back piece, and this back piece is 4 inches. I'm going to actually extend it out and make it 8 inches, and then just come along the front of this pattern all the way 4 inches wider, and then 4 inches down the front. And then I'm also going to add 5 inches to the length. And again, I just got these numbers because I measured one I liked. If you're not sure, make it wider than you think, because remember, you can always cut it back. So then all I'm going to do is cut those out. When you're doing this here, you don't have to actually change the tissue, but when I put the side back to the back, keep in mind that this has a shoulder seam in it. This shoulder seam has a shoulder pad included. You're not going to have a shoulder pad. So you could just leave it, and then when you try it on, know that you're going to have to adjust this. And you're going to take up here, you're going to taper to nothing here. You don't have a sleeve, so you don't have to worry about making any of those changes. And I wouldn't change the armhole size for a vest. I want it to be that low. So, and I'm going to use the same size, because I could go down if it were a normal vest, but I wanted to have a little bit of fullness, so I'm going to keep the same size. So I'm going to make a shoulder alteration. I could do it after I cut it. I'm going to add length. I'm going to add 5 inches to each of these pieces. I'm going to cut them exactly as they are. I'm going to add 5 inches to this piece, and I'm going to add 4 inches in width all the way around the front, and you'll see that as I cut out. Now, the 2 things I'm going to also do is I'm going to trim this in a black leather. And I've cut a strip here. I want my black leather to be a 1/2 inch all the way around. There are pre-cut leather that you can buy, but I'm going to use a black, and I have the leather, so I'm going to make it. And what I'm going to do is, if I were wrapping the edge, I would do a 1/2 inch and a 1/2 inch. It would be 1 inch, and I would cut an inch strip. But this is a method that will just kind of assure you that it's easier to sew. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this 1 1/4 inches wide. I'm going to give myself a little bit wider. I'm going to fold in the 1/2 inch, and I'm going to go ahead and press this. And I'll show you when we're sewing. I'm going to go ahead and press it. I'll lap it over the raw edge, and because I want to sew from the side that's going to show, I'll stitch right along this straight edge, and make sure you cut it straight. And then what I'll do is I'll just come along to the back, and I'll cut it off right next to the stitched line, so that both sides will look perfect, but in fact it's not. And leather's done that way a lot, and it's very simple to do. Again, you're going to fold it, stitch it on the side that you want to show, and then I'm going to trim away from the back side. Now, so where I'm going to put leather on is I'm going to put it down the front, I'm going to put it around the neck edge, and around the bottom. And so those three places where I would go first is I'm going to sew it the neck edge and the hem first. And then this piece that comes down is done last, because when it's folded back, that will show. And you're just going to cover one, cover the other. You could miter the corners if you want. I've looked at St. John. I've looked at a lot of high-end. None of them miter the corners. I've been really surprised. So they just lap, and leather is done like that quite a bit. So don't feel like you have to. If you want to, you can. Either way, doesn't make a difference. And then I'm going to add a welt pocket. And my welt pocket I'm going to put in between these two seams. It'll give it some structure. And so right around the waistline area, you could actually make it and then decide where you want the welt pocket to go. And the welt pocket I want to be my leather. The two welts are going to be my leather, and the pocket itself will be the fashion fabric. So see, it's so simple. When I go to sew it, I'm just going to sew the body. I'm going to sew the shoulder seams, and that's it. It's pretty quick, and then trim it all up and be done with it. And I'm going to have this great looking vest, and I'm going to show it to you here in a little bit. But other than that, let's start sewing.
Fill me out with your smile, like the sunshine brings the light. Fill me out with a flame, I will let you in this game. Take me out when I'm down, 'cause with you I'm safe and sound, 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 safe and sound.
Okay, so through this process, I've changed my mind a little bit, and I want to show you my leather trim's all sewn on. I love it. But along the bottom, this selvage is so beautiful, I just really want to take advantage of it. But on my particular, and also I've thought that I want to make this reversible. So if you notice, it's light on one side, it's dark on the other. So I want the darker selvage to be on the darker, and I want the lighter to be on the lighter. So I'm finishing off selvage, and Chanel has done this, and I've seen it on a Chanel jacket. So I actually want the lighter side to be on the lighter, and I want the darker side to be on the darker. So the way I'm going to do it, and again, selvage is just fun to play with. There's many different ways to do it, so please don't think this is just, one way. I've serged the edge of the black because I want it to look a little bit more like the leather. I want it to have a dark shadow to it. So I've serged the dark edge with black. This side I've cut wider, and the reason being is because I'm going to sew that along the bottom, and at the same time I'm going to actually sew this up. So I'll stitch that on at the same time. If I don't feel comfortable stitching on at the same time, I could stitch it on 2 times. It wouldn't make a difference. So the darker selvage is going to be on the darker, and the lighter selvage is going to be selvage up, and I'm going to sew it at the same time. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this down and stitch one more time, so that you can see on this side it will look continuous, and I'll just have the shag on the bottom. And on this side it will look like a dark trim. But again, this is all just fun. It can be done anyway. Don't let this stop you from doing your jacket, but that's actually what I'm going to do. All right, so let's sew, and I'll show you what it's going to look like. Now you can align these pieces to where they're very easy. Notice this, the bottom of my jacket is going right along the top of the selvage. This piece I've cut wide enough to where it's going to be sewn at the top of my selvage, but then once it folds over, the selvages will be the same front and back. So the alignment is actually pretty easy. And I think it's easier to sew it all at one time rather than sewing it twice. Just saves a little bit of time. So this is going to be lined up to my selvage. This is going to be lined up to the bottom of my jacket. And I'm just sewing along there. With this rough texture too, if you do miss it, you can come back and patch it. Not a big deal. But again, because the selvage is so good looking, I just really wanted it to be part of the jacket, part of this little vest somewhere. I'm going to stay with black thread throughout, and the reason I'm going to stay with black thread is because this fabric has got this really neat black kind of background. If it didn't, I might have to be a little bit more careful with my threads. So here you can see I've come to the end of my selvage. And so the way to layer this selvage, it's just really easy. I've cut them the same width. You're just going to put one over the other and just keep going. Okay, so where I've just stopped sewing is the trim to the back. I've got the trim on the front. And then I'm going to fold this down. And I've pressed it down all the way here. So you can see I've actually got 2 layers of trim now. And that's how it's going to look from the front. And that's how it's going to look from the back. So you see that you don't really see a lot of the stitching or anything, especially when it's on. It's just really pretty how all of that works. So I'm just going to go one more row of stitching through there, and we're going to call it done. But again, with selvages, it doesn't make any difference how you do things. Don't feel like it has to be exactly like this. You can just come up with all kinds of creative ways to do that selvage, and it just looks wonderful. I love it. It turned out better than I even thought it would. I just really like it. And let me tell you why sewing is so awesome. And I think why it's better than buying. I mean, not only is it a whole lot cheaper than the one I saw at Neiman's, don't get me wrong, but let me just show you a couple things that I just had so much fun doing. I opted to leave off the pockets. The reason I left off the pockets is because I made this reversible, and I'll show you that in just a minute. But also, as I was doing the leather, and I showed you how to do that, this is a really easy way to do the leather trim. I decided instead of the leather at the bottom, I wanted to take advantage of the selvage. The selvage is beautiful on this fabric. And so, but as I made it reversible, I wanted the light trim on the outside and the dark trim on the inside. And again, I showed you how to do that, but I want you to see the look it has with the lighter. It just really looks like it was all cut at the bottom of the jacket, which obviously you know it's not. But the cool thing about using a pattern that has more structure, I'm going to say, to it, is if you notice the armholes, how beautiful the armholes fit. And all I did with the armholes is tuck them under and, you know, top stitch them. You could put trim, you could do leather, you could do all that, but they weren't going to show, but they fit so nicely, and that's the advantage. And then of course the back, it fits so nicely. So many of these that you see that are loose, they're loose everywhere. They just don't have any shaping to them, and they just look like a blob. So I love starting with the jacket that has fit to it because it preserves the fit as you go through. Then also, I want to show you that I can do it this way, but I decided, because I really liked both sides of the fabric, I could make it reversible. And so certainly I could make it reversible. We know and we see serge seams on the outside a lot today, so that's just not a big deal to have the serging on the outside. So it just depends on how you want to wear it. And then also, with the belt, you can belt underneath, but also I could go ahead and wrap this and put the belt on the outside. So I just love all the options that I have with it. The amount that I added when we were doing the cutting, the 4 inches, I love that. I liked how wide it was. It's exactly what I wanted, how far it hung over the back. All of those variables were exactly what I wanted it to be. So I hope you love yours as much as I love mine. I guarantee you I've got a little event I'm going to tomorrow, and I have the perfect thing to wear. One thing I wanted to show you that I saw in a vest, a shawl collar vest at Neiman's, and I wanted to show you this, and I did it on this, but I actually didn't show it to you, is let's look at the table here for just a minute. when you're doing a shawl collar and there's only a single layer and it's reversible, I basically made a French seam out of this center back seam. So this is where the collar joins, you know, where you do the center back seam. That is a French seam. So that way it truly is, both sides are usable and neither one shows. Because the whole thing is reversible, and I decided to make it reversible later in the game, you could make a French seam out of all of these if you wanted to. But again, the serge seaming on the outside is very popular, so I decided that was not a big deal to let it go and be just like this. Anyway, again, I hope you love it as much as I love mine. Happy sewing from Silhouette Patterns. Don't forget to check out our fabrics. We've got some amazing fabrics to do exactly this with. And of course, we've got the leather. So it's all here. Happy sewing.
Safe and sound, 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 safe and sound.